The Honorable the President.
Minister of Agriculture, Land and
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the motion before us has three main elements in it. The first is that Senator Ramdeen has taken the position that the decision of the government in relation to Petrotrin was without stakeholder consultation and with little or no disclosure to the public. The second part of the motion is that Senator Ramdeen is saying the decision to close Petrotrin refinery will have direct adverse consequences on thousands of persons as well as on the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. And the point I was making before we took the break was that the decision to keep Petrotrin refinery in its current form will have even more adverse consequences, and I will talk about that. And then the third area of the motion is that he's asked the Senate to take note of the failure of the government to disclose a viable and credible plan to address the needs of those persons and so on. And Madam President, the opposition has been going around the usual way talking about the government has no plan. In everything we deal with, the government has no plan. And on Petrotrin, the government has no plan. Yet at the same time, making allegations and attacking McKinsey, which forms part of the plan, of Heritage, Paria, Guaracara, the holding company, all of those are elements of the plan. The decision to terminate the employment of the workers, as unfortunate a decision as it is, forms part of a plan. So that the motion must fail, not only because the mover of the motion has failed to defend his own motion. Nothing in this motion could be supported by what is in the public domain. Madam President, my colleague Senator Khan dealt with this issue of stakeholder consultation and disclosure to the public. And you get the impression that the opposition believes that this is a surprise decision. This has come upon us like a thief in the night. But Madam President, that is not so. There has been a history. And the only thing that ought to concern us is the fact that if we go between 2010 and 2015, we'll find absolutely nothing in the form of a plan, a credible plan, an unworkable plan to deal with Petrotrin. Because between 2010 and 2015, the behavior was that Petrotrin will continue in perpetuity. Is no big deal. And just before, in fact, Madam President, just before the 2015 general election, the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee of the Parliament considered the financial statements of Petrotrin for the period September 30th, 2008 to 2013, the 5-year period, 2008 to 2013. And the report was laid in the House, and the membership of the committee is interesting. We had, from my friend's side, Ms. Marlene Kudre, Rujanat Indar Singh, trade unionist, Mr. Fazal Karim, Mr. Chandra Sharma, I believe I saw Mr. McLeod there too, Errol McLeod, Minister of Labor. So my friends on the other side were well represented on this Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, tasked with examining the accounts of Petrotrin. And when you look and when you read the report, Madam President, on page 19, under the heading Petrotrin's Debt Situation, is clear. It says, officials indicated that in 2010, the company inherited a debt of $12 billion. This debt was due to two major projects which had commenced previously, which cost $1.8 billion US, and the WGTL project, which cost $3 billion. And then the report goes on to take note of the two bonds, $850 million US and $750 million US, at a yield of 11% and 6%. So this debt that Petrotrin finds itself in is not news. The two bond payments are not new. We knew it was coming. And what I have not heard, in fact, in relation to the budget debate, in response to the then Senator Ramkisoon, I made the point that in all the emotion, I have not heard anybody say, how are we going to pay that bond that is due next year, the $850 million? I mean what? So that if you are attacking the government's decision on Petrotrin, and Madam President, the government is entitled, that is why we were elected, not to sweep the truth under the carpet. We were elected, in good times and bad times, to make the decisions that ought to be made. And at no point from 2010 to 2015, with the full knowledge that at 2010, the indebtedness, the debt of Petrotrin was $12 billion, there is absolutely nothing that the opposition can put forward as part of their motion which talks about a credible plan. The very thing that Senator Ramdeen says we lack, a credible plan. Not a plan, a credible plan for dealing with Petrotrin. And all the discussion that has taken place out in the public domain, for those who wish to risk the 1-point-something million in support of the 9,000, none of them are advancing a plan to deal with the $850 million US bond payment, with more to follow. Even the trade union leader, Madam President, who found investors, if I was in that position representing these workers who were going home, and I was tasked to put forward an alternative, an option for the government, and out of nowhere came the two angel investors willing to, what did you, my friend, say? Something about sucking this $850 million US bond with, that is lunch and $750 million US for dessert. I would surely have remembered the names. I would surely have remembered, and you talk about McKinsey calling the chairman Wilfred. Well, I would have been on first name basis with those fellas. And I would not have gone in the place where you have to deal with the matter and not remember the investors. And that is only because, Madam President, there is no plan but this plan. This is the plan. And it falls to this government to implement this plan, as harsh and unacceptable as it sometimes seems. It was there, Madam President. Madam President, I have listened to everything that has been said about Petrotrin. And there are four realities that that motion failed to address. One is debt servicing. The other is the revenue situation at Petrotrin. The third is the investments required to make Petrotrin profitable over the long term. And the fourth is the risk profile of Petrotrin. And let me start with number 4. Because people believe, and when I was in sugar, they did the same, Madam President. They behaved as though that 100-year-old factory was brand new technology that could compete with Brazil and Thailand and so on, and I spoke about it before. Madam President, one oil spill, my colleague Senator Khan knows that, and I was there. I was there in the last oil spill, and my colleagues were in government in the one before that. The risk with that poor infrastructure is perhaps greater than the risk of a Petrotrin default on its debt service, and the risk, because we might be able to control the numbers in relation to the people we owe, but a major spill in Petrotrin we would not be able to control, and the damage will be significant. So when you talk, you behave as though this is a brand new. The major challenge, and in this report, the 5th report of the Public Account Enterprises Committee, with Mr. McLeod and Mr. Indar Singh, Ms. Kudre, Mr. Sharma, they knew. The report addressed it. The lack of proper maintenance of the infrastructure over the last decade. This is a 2015 report. The previous decade would have been 5 years, 2010 to 5 years to 2015. The lack of maintenance, the inability to produce offshore water because of aged pipelines and so on, and aged infrastructure. So, Madam President, to make Petrotrin efficient, to make the refinery and to make the infrastructure produce, there must be investment. And let us face the reality. You are so heavily leveraged. Your revenue stream, you're unable to support yourself, far less in infrastructure investments, because I'll get to that when I talk about revenue. You are unable to invest in yourself, to maintain what you have, to meet your day-to-day commitments. Your primary production has suffered because of quantity, because of failure to bring new oil to the market, and because of the international pricing. So as I said when I spoke about my experience in sugar, when I was asked why I was leaving the sugar industry, I said it's an impossible place to be a leader, to be a CEO. You have no control over the cost of your input, your material. You have no control over your labor costs. You are at the mercy of the trade unions. You're selling outside at a fixed price, and it is impossible. And when companies find themselves in a situation of impossibility, they have to reorganize the business. And at the heart of the Petrotrin decision, at the heart of the plan, is not a decision to get out of oil production in this country. It is not a decision to stop being a refiner. It is not a decision to stop supplying energy products to the local and the regional market. It is a decision to do so using a different corporate structure, using a different employee profile, and doing things differently like we've always been asked to do. We've always been asked, and one of the problems we always complain about in this country is that we're not dealing with the state enterprises. We're not willing to do this. Well, listen, we have to, and Petrotrin is one of them, and this government is dealing with them on the basis on which we've outlined. Madam President, in this report on the accounts, the committee asked a question to Petrotrin about being able to manage, given all that the committee found in terms of the revenue and so on. And they asked the question, and it's captioned, Solvency of Petrotrin and the Downturn of the Energy Market, as a caption. And I would read. It's on page 31 of the 5th report of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. And it's very important. It reads, the committee inquired whether Petrotrin viewed itself as being solvent in the midst of a downturn of the gasoline and crude oil market. Petrotrin's officials informed the committee that because the company was in the business of exploration and production, as well as refining and marketing, there was no need for concern. 12 billion in debt, 2 bullet payments coming shortly, and there was no need for concern. Petrotrin indicated that their current 5-year forecast showed the company would remain viable and sustainable even during this downturn. Petrotrin also stated that the entire petroleum market was a cyclical market in which they have been through on countless occasions. That is what Petrotrin management put forward in response to a question. This committee has just examined your accounts for 5 years, and they're asking you about solvency. That is not a normal question. When you examine or when you look at the accounts of a company, it's not a normal question for anybody to ask, but anybody with a knowledge of how things work and a little understanding, any housewife, anybody could tell you that if what coming in is less than what going out, you're treading water. But not one of the company officials who came before this committee understood, not one used the language. In other words, we've gone through this plenty time, but you know what has saved them? They are state enterprise. A state enterprise that could ask the Minister of Finance to provide money to pay for imported oil, to guarantee debts, and to bail them out, while at the same time not remitting taxes that are required. So with Petrotrin, it's a one-way street, beating apart to the Minister of Finance. And every dollar that is spent on Petrotrin picks the pocket of those who are not working in Petrotrin. And that is what this plan addresses. This plan, as it ends up, we are not doing an injustice to the Petrotrin worker. The Petrotrin worker, they're covered by a collective agreement. They have a union. They are in court with their employer. They have their pension plan with the rules that sets out the benefits to be provided. They have their medical plan. They have their hospital. This is not about injustice to Petrotrin, but this is about justice to the rest of us, because we've carried that load for a very long time, and for a long time, the signals have been sent that it cannot continue like that. And from 2010 to 2015, my friends were prepared to bury their heads in the sand. We are not prepared to do that. There is too much at stake in relation to Petrotrin for us to be playing the fool. And the revenue situation. We've heard all the figures. So what people do, Madam President, Petrotrin is producing 40,000 barrels a day. The price of oil is 60 US a barrel. So they multiply 60 US by 40,000 a day, and Petrotrin making real money. Without realizing, like most enterprises, state entities and state activities in this country, the more you do, the more you lose. And when we spoke about on the bill relating to court pay, I told you that there are people in this country who will not allow payments made to the state to be collected electronically. They prefer that it costs $500 with a clerk sitting by a desk with 2 security guards there. It costs $500 in the state sector to collect 50 cents. Somebody went to HTC recently to pay $300 to get a search done. It took them 1 hour in the line to pay that. And could you imagine the transaction costs? How much it costs them in terms of time, and how much it costs HTC just to collect $300. That if even in the current environment, if you went to a Playway booth, a Playway agent, you could pay money that will eventually be remitted to the Treasury. Because you could, I keep saying, you could buy a ticket to a fete in this country by Playway, but you can't pay for a government service using the same electronic system. And that is what we miss in places like Petrotrin. When you watch revenue, nobody is checking that with every barrel of oil that Petrotrin refines, it actually loses more money. In other words, it is cheaper for Petrotrin to cease all activities and just maintain the staff by paying them their salaries. It is cheaper. Senator Big, you look shocked. Just like your colleagues who had the accounts and didn't have much to offer, go and check the accounts. Go and check the revenue profile. Revenue, when you're in the state sector, you only look at revenue. Check the expense side. And check, and Senator Khan will tell you, every additional barrel of oil that is refined in Petrotrin comes at a greater loss to the taxpayers. So it's not just revenues. It's the expenditure profile. It's the cost of doing business. It's what Petrotrin inherited. Expensive contractors, cost overrun on projects, failure to manage projects, procurement issues. All those things have added up over a period of time, and it falls to us to deal with. And the issue of debt servicing. Petrotrin, Madam President, every time Petrotrin and the Minister of Finance and some of my colleagues have made the points on in either answering questions previously or in the public domain, this issue of how Petrotrin runs its business. In the normal scheme of things, you are supposed to be taking money generated by your revenue to buy your raw material. Fella making corn soup and selling understands that. The corn soup man understands that you have to first pocket the money to buy your raw material, and then you pocket your profits. But in the case of Petrotrin, when Petrotrin buys this raw material that goes into their refining and marketing business, they do that through the Minister of Finance. They do that by borrowing. And the Minister of Finance has been saying that. When people talk about the debt and Petrotrin being able to manage its own affairs, that is not true. Petrotrin is doing its core business by riding on the backs of the other 1.1 million to keep the 9,000 going, to keep the expensive contractors going, to fund the cost overruns, to fund the efficiencies. It's the rest of us in the country that has been carrying the load. and you can't service it, when this payment becomes due, how is Petrotrin going to make, where is it coming from? And I am waiting for any one of my colleagues on that side to say to me, in terms of the complaint of the absence of a credible plan, how Petrotrin is going to service its debts. Money is due next year. How are you going to pay the $850 million? But Madam President, in all of this, I've listened to the $850 million discussion. In all of this, people forget that the holders of those bonds, have first recourse. They are the ones who could put Petrotrin out of the misery. And what would happen then? What would happen if the holder of the bond decides that there's an issue to Petrotrin's ability to pay, and then they take control of the affairs of Petrotrin? Where the employees rank in such a situation? I have not heard anyone so far deal with the issue of priorities, so that if, and you don't have to wait for the bond to be due. You don't have to wait. We don't have to wait for that. If one of the holders of the bond believes, and why shouldn't they believe? It's the owner of Petrotrin saying we can't make the payment. Why should they not believe? And if the holder of the bond takes action, then the employees will be far worse off. Which brings me back to the motion. The motion complains. The motion complains that the decision to close the refinery will have direct consequences on the thousands of persons and so on. And the persons who are most exposed are, of course, the employees. But in this motion, I have not seen a complaint that the government has failed to honor the severance payment provision in the collective agreement. I have not seen that. I have not heard that argument in the court. There was one argument in the industrial court, which was not new, and one decision of the court which is also not new. When you take the Petrotrin Industrial Court decision and put it side by side with the 2003 Caroni decision, they're the same. It addressed the issue of failure to meet and treat in the consideration of good industrial relations practice. It was not an examination of the merits of the government's decision. It did not go into the balance sheet and the financial performance of Petrotrin, because even the court understands that an employer must be given,
Minister, you have 5 more minutes.
Thank you, must be given the opportunity to run its business. And this motion, and nothing I've heard here, I've heard about Riley, but I have not heard. There are people I know. James Williams lives up by me. He was very happy to get his letter, because like Caroni Limited, all people moan and groan about the government and the PNM did this to Caroni. Well, I will tell you, by the time the calculations were done and the letters were being prepared, 3,500 Caroni workers were better off going home and not working the remainder of their careers. 3,500. 3,500 with the payment they were getting, with the offer of land, retraining, with the pension arrangements which were put in place, were better off. And I'm not saying anybody should be happy by losing their job, but the fact is that between employer and trade union, they have negotiated an agreement. And if there is an issue with the agreement, they will go to the industrial court. And this motion before us, as bare as it is, makes no allegation that we failed or we unable or we unwilling to meet the commitments of the workers. And I don't know how many of you have gone through this. The government and nobody, McKinsey or anybody, nobody could specify in that level of detail what is going to happen with all the assets and so on. Nobody's going to do that. But what we know is that the government has outlined a plan for Petrotrin. It has to do with the debts that become due in the next 2 years that we cannot pay. It has to do with Petrotrin's long-term, long-existing problems. It has to do with infrastructure and the poor state of infrastructure. And it has to do with being in control of our affairs and not allowing a bondholder to come in and run things. And this is as bad as it is. This is the best and only opportunity for us to hold the reins and manage Petrotrin down to where it should be. And at the same time, give opportunities. I've heard BP being attacked, and I don't want to defend BP. I'm a past employee of BP, and BP is in my community in Mayaro. But this thing about, you're talking about BP and Senator Obika talking about Masade done. But check the contribution of BP to this country's economy. Check the contribution. And check the resources and the investment and the capital that BP has and they've brought to the country. Why not? Why not? In the situation we have demonstrated that we are unable to run Petrotrin. Why not infuse the company and the successor companies with the talent required to give us the best in bad circumstances? Madam President, this motion must fail. It's not even defended. It's not even defended by the mover. It's not even defended by the second speaker on the opposition bench. And if I give them the remaining time in this session of Parliament, they will not be able to put forward a credible plan for Petrotrin. When they had the opportunity to do that, they did absolutely nothing. I thank you.
Senator Vieira.
Thank you, Madam President. Before I begin, let me just preface by saying my training as a lawyer inclines me towards being cynical. But we shouldn't confuse being cynical with being jaded or prone to conspiracy theories, because I'm not into either of those two categories. Having said that, there's just one little niggling thought about the restructuring exercise that I just want to get off my chest, and it's this. Petrotrin has been stripped of all its assets and property. Now, I understand we are disaggregating an integrated oil company. And these assets and properties are being put into 3 new vehicles. These vehicles have no liabilities. They have no conveyancing fees. They have no taxes due. There is going to be no fallout from ongoing litigation. So they're really nice plums. And because they're under the Companies Act, they can be easily transferred. They can easily be acquired by third parties by a simple sale of shares. So I would just like to say, I'm not suggesting for a moment that there's anything invidious or sinister, but I would like to be assured that safeguards are in place to guard against the loss of national assets and patrimony. Now, having said that, I want to thank Senator Ramdeen for bringing this motion. Not so quick, because even though I may not agree with his proposition, and even though I may not agree with his resolution, he has raised important issues, which afford a platform considering matters which should be of interest to all of us. The parts that resonated most with me in his motion have to deal with issues pertaining to redundancy and the displacement of workers, the desirability for stakeholder consultation, the future of jobs for workers in this country, and the need for proper planning. This, I hope, will be the beginning of a crucial conversation that we need to have, where the stakes are high and emotions run strong. Petrotrin was a major player in this country's economic development in the 20th century, and it's really sad to see its demise. It's a hard situation all round. It's hard for the workers. It's hard for those who do business with the company. It's hard for management, for the union, and for the businesses in the area who are going to be affected. Now, I don't know about a plan to bring down Petrotrin, but it's clear that Petrotrin has become an albatross. And as hard as it is for everyone, the company and government are under a duty to act decisively and responsibly. Much has been said on this already, and I don't want to belabor the point. Suffice to say, it is indeed a difficult situation. As a company operating under the Companies Act, the directors of Petrotrin are under statutory duty to act honestly and in good faith with a view to the best interests of the company. And the Act specifically prescribes that in determining the best interests of the company, the directors must have regard to the interests of the company's employees in general, as well as to the interests of its shareholders. So I would like to believe that the directors, mindful of the underlying risks mapped out by Senator Rambarat, the risks threatening the company, have acted honestly in the belief that the course they have charted is in the best interests of the company, calculated to avoid events which may bring down or seriously damage the company and ultimately the country. Now I want to talk a little bit about the workers, because, as I said, Senator Ramdeen has given us a springboard to talk about jobs and the future of jobs. What happens to a person who, through no fault of his or her own, loses their job? I remember when my father lost his job when I was younger and how that affected me and my family. Besides the loss of income and concerns about being able to meet payment obligations, you're gripped by fear, anxiety. There are feelings of shame as though you've done something wrong. And besides the loss of self-esteem, some succumb to alcoholism, abuse, and domestic violence is not uncommon. So the loss of a job can be debilitating and traumatic, not just for the job loser, but for his family and for communities. And so we must all be concerned and do all we can to cushion the fall for those who, through no fault of their own, now find themselves in difficult circumstances. Treating with displaced workers requires care and compassion. And that is why in our jurisdiction, a person's job is regarded as a form of property and not to be trifled with. But people can lose their jobs through no fault of their own where there is a redundancy. And that is to say, where there is surplus labor, a shutdown, or a change in company operations which have resulted in redundant labor or a labor force in excess of the company's requirements. And in such a situation, the employer has a right to retrench any redundant worker. This is an ancient common law right, which has merely been regulated by the Retrenchment and Severance Benefits Act. But my concern, Madam President, is that Petrotrin may just be the beginning of a tsunami of redundancies to come. Petrotrin went under, as we have heard, because of grave systemic issues. $12 billion in debt, bond payments that are becoming due, out-of-sync spending, and of course the energy crisis did it in. But there are other elements operating at large that we also, I respectfully suggest, we ought to be paying attention to. Senator Khan spoke about the need for technology, the human brain, including software, having to transform and to get out of the old cocoon, I think is what you said. Well, I want to agree with you, but I think there's a dark side to that. and this is what I want to make in my contribution. The new technologies are changing the way we work. The new technologies have the potential to do away with the jobs of most workers. We are in the midst, Madam President, in what is being called the fourth industrial revolution, a revolution which is transforming the world profoundly and which will have significant ramifications on our lives and in industry. Mobile internet, machine learning, artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, materials engineering, blockchain, self-driving cars, drones, advanced robotics, and the Internet of Things are going to trigger a destructive effect in the labor market. Robots don't get sick. They don't need brakes. They don't need health insurance. Robots eliminate human error, and they can do the same job as several people at a one-time cost. But I want to suggest not only blue-collar workers are going to be affected. The technological advancements are going to change business models and threaten jobs in nearly every sector, including white-collar and the professions themselves. Senator Khan had mentioned about how you can have the necessity for camps are now irrelevant. You can monitor a rig from Texas. Well, that's right. But what does that mean? It means less jobs for people. You don't need them. Automation and digitization has the potential to help banks cut their labor forces. And we can expect further redundancies as banks streamline their businesses. Advanced robotics are going to provide a vastly cheaper, better all-round customer care service than human workers. And this is going to cause serious disruption to job markets as customer interactions will be handled without a human agent. A friend of mine just came back from a meeting in Silicon Valley, and he didn't have a bellhop. He had a little robot following him, taking his orders if he needed toothpaste, opening the elevator, everything. This is the world we're living in. Self-driving cars and blockchain, which some are already touting as the greatest technological innovation since emergence of the World Wide Web. Well, blockchain has the potential to do away with the jobs of professional middlemen, like lawyers and agents. Now, it may not render all professions obsolete, but it's going to change roles. And so traditional professions also need to be flexible and to adapt. So Senator Ramdeen's motion highlights job displacement for me and the direct adverse consequences on Petrotrin's refinery workers. And it is right and just to be concerned about them, but I suggest we should also be looking at the transformative trends and the bigger picture. Senator Khan, you spoke about inching our way. We're not inching our way. What is clear is that these transformative technologies, the velocity of change is unprecedented. The technological advancements are changing business models, and they're going to threaten jobs in every sector. And we need to prepare for the anticipated job displacements. We need to get beyond the tribe's effect, which leads to an us versus them mentality, and which tends to generate a self-righteous, adversarial, and closed mindset. I would like to see a reconfiguration of our political, business, and social relationships. There is always potential for division in this country. We are divided in every way possible. Geographically, South people not interested in town or Tobago, class, religion, race. There's a lot of potential for division. But there's also potential for unity, as we saw recently with the floods, where everybody came together to help. To prevent an unemployment crisis and the possibility of social unrest, we need to enact social and political reforms. We need to invest in human capital via education and aligning these with our needs. And everybody has to get on board. We need to do a whole examination of job classifications. I was talking with someone the other day who was saying, you know, that in administrative works you have these old cutters, grass cutters. A grass cutter in the 21st century, when you have a little machine you can just drive around in. All of these things are passé, they're obsolete, they're redundant. We need to go and revisit all of these things because they're going to be left behind. We're going to have a lot of people who are going to be unemployable. Our workers have to be retrained. Government needs to adapt its policies and regulations to the challenges posed by the technologies into business processes, and a top-down approach is not going to work. An astute government will seek to collaborate with the unions, with citizens, and with business in a new way. So come back to redundancy. Even if a dismissal is genuinely on grounds of redundancy, whether it's fair or unfair to dismiss the employee, normally depends on whether the employer acted reasonably in reaching the decision to dismiss. Individual consultation is required in all cases. The law requires notice to the Minister of Labor where 5 or more workers are being made redundant. Now, I don't know the status and the content of the relevant collective agreements, but as a matter of best practice, I tend to agree with Senator Ramdeen that where large numbers are involved, the company should be under duty to consult collectively. People are more likely to commit to solutions resulting from open dialogue and where ideas and information are genuinely and freely shared. And on the other hand, people tend to resist decisions which are made without consultation. The challenges posed by the fourth industrial revolution is going to affect everyone. We need to stop bickering and divisive grand staging and grand charging. Senator Ramdeen's motion speaks to the direct adverse consequences on thousands of persons as well as on the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. Well, that prompts me to call for a national colloquium involving government, unions, business, professions, and academia. The floods were a natural disaster, but there's an economic disaster looming on the horizon. Being prepared is key. The only way we can successfully meet the challenges ahead is for us to come together. Our survival is going to depend on this. From all I have heard, Petrotrin is in dire straits. Senator Khan spoke of the hemorrhaging of money and the grave systemic issues. Senator Rambarat talked about the $12 billion debt. And besides the risk of financial collapse, the company should not be operating if it's technically insolvent. Otherwise, you run the risk of what they call fraudulent trading. So the actions taken by the directors and government have been conducted under adverse circumstances with limited options. I have no doubt about that. I would like to believe that there has been consultation with the individual workers and that they are all going to be treated fairly. I would also like to believe that government's operational framework has been carefully thought through, and the decision to cease refining operations is the best available option in the circumstances. I accept that when government analyzed Petrotrin, there were realities to confront. And I have not seen any evidence to suggest that government has acted dishonorably. So I will not support the resolution in condemning its actions in closing the refinery. My hope, though, is that we can all learn from the experience and treat what has happened at Petrotrin as a warning about what the future potentially holds. The crisis at Petrotrin was years in the making, and the powers that be really took too long in dealing with it. Had things been dealt with in a more timely fashion, who knows? Petrotrin's closure might have been mitigated or avoided. This is a failing of past administrations. But we are in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. Job displacement, there's a tsunami coming, and it's going to threaten the jobs of all workers, and it's fast approaching. Time is not on our side. The Petrotrin workers will get severance and other benefits. Others may not be as lucky. Was government clumsy in the way the situation was handled? The country will decide. Could the situation have been handled better? I don't know. The Chinese have a saying, it's easy to name the problem, but fixing it is a different story. What I do know is that we need to learn from the experience and to commit to solutions resulting from open dialogue where ideas and information are going to be freely shared. This will lead to smarter decisions. We need to rethink traditional ideas about the way we work and we earn money. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Senator Thompson-Aye.
Madam President, I rise to speak to this motion. And this is because I was drawn to a particular segment of the motion. Direct adverse consequences on thousands of persons. That decision to close the Petrotrin refinery. Following on my colleague, perhaps it is fortuitous that I should do so, I would like to distance myself from the very first remark that he made about lawyers. He spoke of lawyers being cynical. I speak here on behalf of a constituency that is very close to my heart, and that is the constituency that has no political voice, that cannot speak for themselves, the children of this country. We sing along with Whitney Houston. I believe the children are our future. Treat them well and let them lead the way. And we sing with great verve and vitality. And do we really believe that? In 1991, Trinidad and Tobago ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. That's 27 years ago. And in doing so, we made a solemn promise to children that we're going to do right by them. That is the Children's Bill of Rights. Since 1215, we've had the Magna Carta. That's 803 years. Children are now getting their rights. And we promise faithfully that we will give them the rights to which they are entitled to as human beings. That's their human rights. My particular interest is justice for children. So when I say I depart from my friend, I go back to the Child Justice World Congress I attended in Geneva. And I left there with the mantra ringing in my heart and soul. All of those justice ministers present there came to that resolution that juvenile justice practitioners, lawyers, all of those who care about children and justice for children are merchants of hope. We must have hope. So we must also offer solutions. Nelson Mandela, in his book, Long Walk to Freedom, that made me remember in my school days, some books are to be digested. You don't just read it. So I'm digesting that book. When I went to South Africa, I always overpack. I didn't buy it then. It was too heavy. My daughter gave me a gift, so I'm reading it. And one of the things that he said is that sometimes, I'm paraphrasing, I actually wrote it out, but it's disappeared from me, that when you are pushed, when you reach a place where you feel there is no hope, that's a time for opportunity. So there are many opportunities. We ratified the convention, and having ratified, we submitted our initial report. That convention is supposed to be known by adults and children alike, and I'm not going to embarrass anybody by saying how many people actually know the principles and provisions of the convention. And after we submitted the report, what happens? The Child Rights Committee that is in charge of implementation under Article 43 gives a list of issues. We respond to the list of issues, and we have the concluding observations containing the recommendations. And one of the recommendations of the Child Rights Committee on our last report, because having submitted it late, we have another report, 2006, so we're way behind, but I understand we're going to be doing it very soon. So one of the recommendations was education and training of a number of people, including parliamentarians. And why educate parliamentarians? Because we pass laws. And we pass laws that impact on children. And if we pass laws that impact on children, we ought to know that these laws all comply with the Convention on the Rights of the Child. In addition to what is in the Convention, the Child Rights Committee expands on an understanding of the various principles, articles of the Convention by giving general comments. And one of the general comments that came out from the Child Rights Committee in 2013 is the state obligations regarding the impact of the business sector on children's rights. So we always have to think about what impact our business decisions have, the companies, what impact does it have, do these decisions have on children and their rights? Are we in compliance? My friend, and this is where we agree, that losing a job is very traumatic, very traumatic. William Ayres, who wrote about the Children's Court, he spoke about the Great Depression in 1933. Before all of you were born, all of you young people here. And he said the murder rate spiraled out of control. Now, just think, what happened recently in this country? We had a report from the Children's Authority. We had a report also from the Child Protection Unit. And both reports spoke to horrendous abuse of children in this jurisdiction. And most time we get them, we say, ooh, and what's happening? But we know that children are abused. And we know also that when you suffer a traumatic experience, it's going to affect you. You are going to lash out on your children. So most of the abuse we hear, they are being carried out by parents. So what is going to happen when parents themselves now are traumatized, they are frustrated, they feel, they've lost their sense of identity? How am I going to actually take care of my family? I may have a lump sum payment, but then how long is it going to last? So if the parents are abusing the children now, we expect that the abuse will escalate. Let's be real. And then what's going to happen? Hurting people hurt people. So children are going to get, first of all, in many instances, a direct hit. And also, they are going to suffer secondary trauma, because what happens to you as a parent affects your child. You are a child and you are looking on and you see mother is suffering, father is suffering. You are also going to react to that. And then when children begin to act out, how do we treat them? I got a call from Mayaro the other day. And that's why I remember, I see we have plenty of Mayaroians in the house. I have deep roots in Mayaro, more than some people who say they belong to Mayaro. All right? Yes. Yes, I have been. Don't take my 40 minutes, please. Yes, so the fact is, yes, Mr. Mayaro. My mother was a Timothy, right? She used to say Timothy from the Bible, and they're from Mayaro too. Immortalized by Michael Anthony in his book. So that this call from Mayaro was, do you know that this child who got herself in a lot of trouble and was suspended from school has a parent in prison? And I thought back to that symposium that was held in University of the West Indies earlier this year that I attended, children of incarcerated parents. And I heard the testimony of some of those children. It was very painful to listen to. So we have all of these things happening, children who are suffering, and we talk about zero tolerance. Zero tolerance when really we should be talking about healing those children. So we ought to change our way of dealing with children because there's going to be fallout in many instances because of the loss of jobs, because of that loss of the sense of self and self-esteem, and think about doing things another way.
Madam President, I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, 4th December 2018 at 1:30 p.m. During that sitting, if the income tax amendment bill is passed in the other place, we will be debating that. If not, we will be debating a bill entitled an act to amend the Magistrates Protection Act.
Honourable Senators, before I put the question on the adjournment, leave has been granted for two matters to be raised on the motion for the adjournment of the Senate. Senator Ovika.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I want to start this motion on the adjournment by telling the people of Point Fortin that they can rest assured that the United National Congress will be defending them all the way to the general election in 2020. Now, this motion has to deal with the impact of the road, the main road, the southern main road to Point Fortin, the negative impacts on the society. And there are four dangers. Four dangers. The first is the road users. The second is the cost to the pockets. So the next damage, as we say in Trinidad, is to the pockets of the users of the road. The third danger has to do with road safety. And the fourth danger is a danger to our democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. With respect to road users, Madam President, we have school children heading to school who cannot focus because in the vehicles within which they are traversing, they are so affected by the poor roads that they can't concentrate and relax on their way to school. Correct. We have pregnant women, Madam President. I say so because my wife is also pregnant. Thank you. I'm not sure husbands can take praise for the wife's pregnancy, but I'll take it. I'll convey the message.
One more plus.
So, now, but when you are driving there, you can imagine when I'm driving by myself, I can drive more freely. But when I'm driving with my wife, it takes almost twice the time because the road is so bad. Then we have ambulances. I don't know how they make the journey. I really don't know. And we have prisoners going to court. And those vehicles drive very, very quickly. The cost to users, Madam President, is there's a longer time journey. And we all know time is money. And in this age, one can't afford to sacrifice time. And another cost is the damage to the vehicles of the users. And with respect to damage to the vehicles, I want to turn to an article in Trinidad Express dated the 31st of October 2018, Road Rage in Labre, Point Fortin by Kimoy Leon Singh. And it states that they were looking at the tensions mounting in Point Fortin and Labre regarding the road, and the Taxi Drivers Association president, Mr. John David, was leading these protests. And he said that it has been like this for some time, that is the road, but it is getting worse. It is costing drivers almost $2,000 monthly to repair their vehicles. Madam President, this can only mean that it will result in an increase in cost to the same users on these roads. Danger number 3 has to do with road safety. Accidents can occur when you are dodging potholes. In fact, when you are driving on those roads, Madam President, you have to determine which pothole you will fall in, because you will fall in one. All right? Then you have the representation. It's actually dangerous to our democracy, and I'll explain that with a passage that I want to read from. In that, you have the pitch lake in Labrie. Can you imagine, we boast of our world-famous asphalt that surfaces roads all over Europe, Africa, China, the Caribbean. But in the locale where the asphalt comes from, the roads are the worst in the world. That is an indictment on this government. Now, what is even worse is that the people in those two constituencies have voted, have placed their faith in this government. They have stained their fingers in the old days of shedding blood. For when you vote, they ceremoniously dip their finger in that red ink for this government, only to realize that nothing has happened. Madam President, when a government declares that they don't respond to protests, a tone-deaf government, this tone-deaf government responds that they don't respond to protests. All the citizens here is that your government really doesn't care. They don't care about you. Correct. So you could protest from today till 2020. They're not going to do. In fact, what we had is the shameless display of a government minister coming to this house and stating that they are going to engage in a road patching exercise. Now, Madam President, if the potholes didn't take away your shocks, the rises from the patches will damage your suspension. So now we're dodging potholes in some parts and small hills in the other, because those patches are a very unsightly thing. Now, Madam President, I want to read a short extract here regarding the importance of roads to national development. Because the development of the transport road network plays an important role in economic development of a country, and therefore the kilometer age of paved roads exists in a country is often used as an index to assess development. So how many kilometers of paved roads you have is used as an index for development nationally and within your country at the regional level. So the proper development of a transport road network in the case of Trinidad and Tobago not only reduces the cost of transportation, both in terms of money and time, but it also integrates various regions in the country. So what is that in essence? In essence, what we are saying is, just as Point Fortin has contributed to the development of Trinidad and Tobago by virtue of oil and gas, Labrie by virtue of the port at Brighton, by virtue of the asphalt, LNG. And the skills of the people in Point Fortin. I mean, without Point Fortin, Madam President, we wouldn't have even our road march from this year. Because Trinidad and Tobago must not only thank the superior Dr. M, they also have to thank Austin Lyon Super Blue. Because without him, the song wouldn't have happened. So, Madam President, if we have to analyze the cultural, economic, and social contribution of Point Fortin to the development of Trinidad and Tobago, and then we juxtapose that by the fact that the people of Point Fortin, should they fall sick, may die before they reach San Fernando. Because if they don't end up in an accident on the road, the shocks don't go bad, or the driver just strikes because he can't afford it. It really shows you that this government has forsaken the people of Point Fortin, Labrie, Cedros, and the entire Southwest Peninsula over the virtue of this road. And I want to close by saying this. When they were in opposition, they shouted from here and there about the highway, saying that the partnership was billing it on cash, and they didn't want to approach international lenders because of the strict criteria. In their 4th year in government, Madam President, it would shock you to know that they have not approached these same international lenders to face these same stringent criteria. Thank you very much. So what it means is that this government has failed to fix the road, failed to provide the road, failed to listen to the people, and they have failed to deliver on the highway project. I thank you very much.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam President, I am a bit confused this evening because I have a motion here filed by the Honorable Senator that says the failure of the government to properly execute the Point Fortin Highway project and bring timely relief to the people of the Southwest Trinidad. The Senator got confused, spoke about the question he asked earlier, and then started talking about the Eastern Main Road going down, the Southern Main Road. And I am confused that the Senator did not even understand the motion that he filed. He mixed up the motion with the question. Madam President, I came to defend the motion on the Point Fortin Highway. I am sorry you didn't bring a full motion that I probably would have had 40 minutes to talk about the South Highway and not just 10 minutes. Madam President, let me go back to the history of that highway, because I came to debate the highway and you got confused with your motion. Madam President, I just want to quote the Honorable Minister of National Security when we opened they formally opened the first package of that highway, and I just want to quote the Honorable Stuart Young, Minister of National Security, on June 8, 2018. The Point Fortin Highway project reminded this country of the history of that project under the hands of the former UNC administration and the award of $1 billion in cash contract to a company that is now internationally covered completely in what has become known globally as the biggest corruption scandal in the world, not in Trinidad and Tobago, in the world. All right? This is the first incarnation of the UNC government. We're still reeling from the Piaco International Airport, but that was just 1-point-something billion. This highway is the biggest corruption scandal.
Seriously, Senator Amin, I am on my feet to ask members, please, you can choose to sit here quietly and listen to the minister, or you can leave. And if you choose to sit here and you're not being quiet, then I may ask you to leave. You all get it, right? Continue, Minister.
Thank you. Madam President, this highway was a PNM project tendered out in 2010 under the People's National Movement. When the bids came in, the engineer's estimate was $3.6 billion. The contract was not awarded. Why? Because the bids came in $1.6 billion over the engineer's estimate. The then PNM government decided we are not going to award it because we have to either retender it or renegotiate. What happened? The government changed. The UNC government awarded the highway for $5.2 billion, $1.6 billion over the engineer's estimate. There was a land acquisition estimate for $400 million. As we speak, with about 50% of the land acquired, we are close to $600 million, and a significant amount of the land that was purchased and paid for was not required. Yes. Madam President, yes. What was the highway? The highway was simply a 47-kilometer, 4-lane highway from, broken up in 3 segments. The UNC awarded the contract to the OAS company. What happened? In 2011, they awarded the contract. In 2012, the contractor recognized that time was running out on them. They asked for a rescheduling of the contract. In 2013, they came back again for a rescheduling of the contract. In 2015, it was supposed to be delivered at the end of 2015. By the end of 2015, with less than 50% of the contract being completed, they rescoped the work again and never started back the work in 2016. What this government did, terminated the contract on them, went to court, and was successfully able, Senator Obika, the reason why we didn't go to the international lending agencies as yet is because on that case, the government was successful to get back $1 billion, taxpayers' dollars, to continue the work on the highway. $1 billion, and that is the money that we're spending now to complete the highway. Madam President, It's a pity I really don't have the 40 minutes to debate this. When this government took over the highway, what we had an incomplete highway with 8 bridges incomplete, most of the roads incomplete. And what was significant, this was a design build contract. So obviously, the design should have been completed. 80% of the money for the design was paid. Less than 50% of the highway was designed. So what this government had to do, we had to engage CH2M to continue the designs. This government took a decision to tender break the remainder of the highway into 12 packages. And Senator Obika said nothing is happening. Well, Senator Obika, the reason why you think nothing is happening is because there's no corruption in the project right now. So without corruption, it is not in the front page of the newspaper every day. This government broke the packages up into 12 segments. And we went out for competitive tendering. And I must say, Madam President, 8 of those packages have already been awarded. 8. 4 is being evaluated now. So by the end of December, January, if the evaluation is completed, it means that the entire segment of the highway would be awarded. And the prices that is coming into, we have brought the price back down close to the $3.6 billion figure. In other words, we were able to go back to the original figure. That was the estimate for the highway. That is what this government is doing. And if Senator Obika goes to Point Fortin, as he tried to give the impression, you will see at least 4 different contractors working on that highway as we speak. The highway has local contractors working. Why? Because the government took a decision to break the packages up so local contractors could now compete for the packages. And so far, the local contractors have been very successful in winning all the packages that went out for tender. Unlike what had happened previously, where one contractor was able to get a contract for $5.2 billion and no local contractor was able to qualify. Madam President, as we speak, as I said, NITCO is evaluating the final 4 packages. And once those 4 packages have been completed, an additional 2 packages will be designed so that we can have the highway in its original design at a significantly less cost than it was being done under the UNC. So, Madam President, this motion, if Senator Obika didn't mix, I presume he mixed up the question and the motion. If Senator Obika defended the motion that he brought, he would realize that the highway project from Point to Point Fortin is underway, and a lot of work is going on. But I don't think Senator, maybe he takes a different route when he's going to Point Fortin. So, Senator Obika, I will take you up on a Saturday morning, and I will take you to the project, and you'll see the project. All right? So, Madam President, Senator Obika didn't really give me, Senator Obika did not give me the challenge that I was really looking for in this debate. And I really wish if you could really file a good debate and let us talk about the San Fernando project. But there are so much things that could come out of that San Fernando project. My advice to the UNC bench is stay away from the San Fernando. There are too much things inside there that you all don't want to come out. But eventually it will come out because, as I said, there are land acquisition that our great-grandchildren will still have to be paying for. Going down the road, hundreds of millions of dollars in land acquisition, right? So, Madam President, I thank you for the opportunity, and I just want to tell Senator Obika, be very careful with the motions that you bring into the House. I thank you.
Senator Dial Singh.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, for allowing me to raise the matter of the need for the government to grant citizens affected by the severe flooding exemptions from value-added tax and import duties on flood protection devices and personal items. I think we saw the Petrotrin disaster coming, we actually knew from looking at past reports, looking at previous governments, looking at the handling of the whole Petrotrin, we knew that there were going to be a stage will reach where we would eventually have to take some hard decisions. And I empathize with those persons who had, who have lost their jobs from Petrotrin and the social fallout. I empathize with them. My colleagues here mentioned about the hard times they will get, the fact that the children will be suffering, and the whole idea that the society there will suffer from this fallout. But what we did not see is on the Friday, the 19th of October, entire families would be devastated with this flood. Homes that probably never even had an ounce of water coming into their homes had water going right up to their ceilings. This was very, very traumatic to those persons there. Entire communities were actually traumatized with this. The fear, the plight of the people, some of those, had suffered great loss. Even business places suffered the losses. So then, even recently, after the major flood, we had another flooding occurring. So some people got what we call a double whammy. Twice they had the flooding. And somebody reached out to me and said, Doc, I don't know when, the next flood arises, what will happen? Will the same thing happen? So those persons are traumatized. Anytime rain falls, they would not know if, again, they will have this sudden loss, this devastation again. So the recovery, it's very difficult for some of those individuals. And some of those individuals, even though they are thankful for the grants that we have gotten from the government, 15,000, I think, in some cases 20,000. Some persons, again, it's not enough because their whole household, they have to refurbish. And then if they are going to be flooded out again, they are like sitting ducks. They're just waiting for this to happen. So that's a great fear they have. So just as how we were asked to bail out some of those Petrotrin workers to make sure there are services in place for them, similarly, I think we have to help bail out these flood victims. Because in these harsh economic times, people are stretching their last dollar, and it's difficult for them. And even with the grant, I'm saying there's a great difficulty. So I say, let's give those persons a chance to protect their homes. There are various flood protection devices available. There are floodgates, different devices you could actually inflate. You can make a whole wall 20, 30 feet with flood barriers. They are what you call sandless sandbags. I don't know why they call it that, where you can actually reuse it. There's something called, the reusable barriers, there's blockage. There's something called a whip system, where it's a water-inflated pump protection system now. Citizens have, and business places, they told me if they can bring in these devices, if they are allowed to bring in the water pumps, large waterproof bags where you can take household furniture and actually put it in a waterproof bag and leave it there. And, so citizens are asked if they can bring in these solar-powered water purifiers charging system. And I'm saying if we could afford, to allow these persons to bring in these devices VAT-free and without any taxes, attached to that, it will bring a relief for some person to protect themselves. Also, in this Christmas season, people are accustomed bringing in barrels, their family bringing stuff for them. And people are accustomed bringing in 3, 4 barrels. Now, at this time, we have some of those victims there who have mentioned that their relatives may want to send items for them. Also certain NGOs, certain church groups have, mentioned they have an interest in sending personal items to those persons. And all I'm asking here really is if we could consider, that those persons may not be able to afford to pay the tax and duties if persons send these items to them. So I pray the minister would consider some level of relief for these flood victims by giving some consideration to that request. Thank you.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would like to thank the new senator for his contribution and his suggestions. But to look at the issue, one has to understand the implications of the way in which you provide relief. When one decides to provide relief by giving a grant, there is control over the amount of money that is being spent, over who it is given to. so that you can predetermine what your costs are and, as I said, maintain control over that. When one gives relief through the tax system, that control is significantly reduced. Now, I was involved in the implementation of that. And the persons who came to Trinidad to recommend how the VAT system should be structured were very clear on their instructions or on their suggestions, on their strong recommendations, that a system of VAT to work at all should be a clean, even system with very little adjustments or reliefs. In the absence of that, it is near impossible to control the VAT, to administer the system, to ensure your collections are where they should be. We saw the implication of that when, under the last administration, the majority of food items were zero rated. Prior to that, the original philosophy was we would zero rate basic essentials, so we kept it tight. And throughout the operation of the VAT system, when I was involved in administration, we sought to ensure that we continued to do that. Once the floodgates were open and a whole wash of VAT exemptions were granted, it made administration and collection of the system really difficult. And to date, the administration has not recovered from that. What we are about to do in the Ministry of Finance is, well, the study has been commissioned and it will start shortly to assess the quantum of leakage in the VAT system, the inefficiencies of the VAT system as it is. And in determining the VAT cost, you may be surprised to know that they don't, the IMF, I think is the body that's doing the work, does not look at only leakages because people have failed to register when they should, because people fail to pay when they should, that kind of thing. As far as the world is concerned, the VAT gap is the difference between what we would collect if we charge a standard rate of VAT on everything in Trinidad and Tobago and what we actually collect. So that not only covers the defaulters who should be complying but don't, but it also covers the loss of revenue that we incur through the various concessions that we give. The zero rating of items, the exemption of items, because all of these are seen to be losses. And the difficulty with that is when you give, as I said, a relief through the system like a VAT system, it is impossible to predetermine what your cost is, which is why we have to conduct an exercise so that we can get an assessment of how much VAT we could potentially collect in Trinidad and Tobago versus how much we are actually collecting and what gives rise to the difference. So while we fully agree with you that the people who suffered in the recent flood in particular were very hard hit, that they do need some support and relief, and the government has, as you recognize, have made an effort to provide relief to them. And this relief, you need to remember, was provided without any consideration of the fact that these people would be entitled to insurance coverage in respect of the losses they incurred. So they got cash payments to deal with, to cover some of the costs they incurred, and they would be able to make claims to the insurance companies for the balance. So we try to be fair without bankrupting people of Trinidad and Tobago. But that, as I said, is an approach that is controllable in terms of cost, that is quantifiable in terms of cost. When we say to Trinidad and Tobago that we are giving flood victims relief from VAT in respect of the importation of flood prevention devices and appliances, how do we determine who is entitled, what they're bringing in, whether it's actually for flood relief or something else? who should benefit. I am sure that members of this House would have read the recent reports that even in the system that we thought was robustly handled and controlled, there were instances of abuse. There were people who got checks who were not entitled. And there were people both inside of the system and outside of the system who contributed to that. How much more of that would we suffer if we said anybody who suffered flood relief would be entitled to bring in equipment through the ports of Trinidad and Tobago? We have questions about how that operates. The customs officers and the other port workers will be the ones in charge of determining who qualifies. If we extend the relief to only people who suffered from the recent flood, what happens to people who say, well, I'm in a flood-prone area, I should also get a benefit? So where do you draw the line? So I agree, and I think the government agrees, that we need to keep revisiting how we provide relief, the forms in which we provide relief, and we certainly have to look more closely at what we do to control the flooding. The Ministry of Works and Transport is engaged in an exercise now to review the incidences that have occurred within the recent years, to look at where the weaknesses are, to determine different solutions or the best solutions to deal with them. And we're working on that. As part of our review of what we are suffering because climate change, which certain members of the international public think is not real, climate change is affecting us and will continue to affect us. So we do need to look more broadly at the issue and determine how we tackle it. And one of the ways to deal with it may be to invest as a country in these flood prevention devices. But we need to be careful as to how we encourage that kind of activity. So as I said, it is something that's currently under review. I welcome your suggestion. I will raise it, but we need to be careful in the approach we take to providing relief. So I thank you, and I will undertake to update you as we come to a decision on where we go with this matter. Thank you, Madam President.
Honourable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday, the 4th of December, 2018 at 1:30 p.m. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to Tuesday, the 4th of December, 2018 at 1:30 p.m.